I never thought something like this would happen to me. My own daughter, the child I have always loved, shoving me off a boat to get her hands on the $3 billion inheritance my husband left behind. As my 72-year-old body hit that cold water, I wasn't thinking about death. I was thinking about my daughter's face and the cold, empty eyes of my son-in-law. They thought they had won, but they were dead wrong. I ask you to listen to my story and to follow along with me, because a voice like ours can never truly be silenced. The yacht was gliding along smoothly, with just the sound of the waves lapping against the hull and the cry of distant gulls. I was looking at my daughter, Amelia. Even at 45, she still had this delicate beauty about her, but her big eyes always held a sadness I could never quite put my finger on. Sitting next to her was Julian, a picture-perfect son-in-law. He was suave, charming, and most importantly, he looked at Amelia with a kind of worship that I always felt my daughter deserved. He was a steady anchor for her fragility. At least, that's what I believed. I cleared my throat, the same way I always did before making a big decision in the boardroom. I asked you both here today, I began, my voice firm and clear, because I want to share my final decision about your father's will, which is also my will. I saw Amelia sit up a little straighter. A flicker of hope sparked in her eyes. Julian placed a hand on his wife's, a tender, reassuring gesture. As you both know, I continued, the legacy your father left behind is more than just money. It's a name, a history, a symbol of hard work and vision. And I've decided the best way to honor that legacy is to make it immortal. I paused for a beat to let the words sink in. I will be using 90% of the estate, nearly $3 billion, to establish the Richard Astor Legacy Institute, a nonprofit foundation, an economic library, and a research center in his name, housed at Columbia University, to inspire future generations. I smiled, the kind of satisfied smile you've just completed a great work. I thought they would be proud. But they weren't. I saw the color drain from Amelia's face. Her lips moved, but no words came out. The wine glass in her hand trembled. Julian was the first to react. He squeezed his wife's hand and turned to me with a face of practiced understanding. "Mother, that's a truly noble idea," he said, his voice as smooth as velvet. "But what about Amelia?" That's when she found her voice, and when it came, it was shattered. 90%? Mom, what are you saying? "Amelia, you will receive a trust," I explained patiently, as if I were talking to a child. "It's more than enough for you to live a life of luxury until your last day without a single worry. But the family legacy is bigger than one person's life." "Legacy?" Her voice cracked. "So what am I then? Am I not your daughter? Am I not part of this family? Or am I just an individual who needs an allowance?" I sighed. There it was again, her oversensitivity. "Don't be so childish, Amelia. This is about the dynasty." "No," she shot to her feet, sloshing her wine. "This is about you. It was always about Dad, the legacy, the Astor name. Even after he's gone, you still choose him, not me." Julian stood up too, gently putting his arm around her. He looked at me, his eyes full of concern and sadness. "Mother, perhaps you don't understand how she feels. Her whole life she's lived in your and Father's enormous shadow. For once, she just wanted to feel like the true heir." His every word was like pouring gasoline on a fire. He wasn't wrong, but the way he said it, the timing of it turned my daughter's sadness into a blaze of fury. "Heir to what?" I raised my voice. "So that you and your husband can turn it into money-losing art galleries and frivolous art investments? Richard Astor's legacy is not a toy." It was a mistake, a fatal mistake. I saw a profound pain flash in Amelia's eyes. She took a step back, as if she'd been struck by an invisible hand. "So that's what you think of me? A frivolous, useless child?" "I didn't mean that," I tried to explain, but it was too late. Julian whispered in her ear, but I could still hear every word. "You see, my love, she will never change. You'll only be truly free when she's gone. Shut your mouth, Julian, I snapped. But my words were lost in the sound of the waves. Amelia looked at me, her eyes empty, no longer my daughter. She was a stranger, twisted by pain. I turned my back, partly in anger, partly because I couldn't bear to see her like that. I looked out at the vast ocean, feeling an infinite weariness. Why could she never understand? And then I felt it. A sudden pressure at my back, not a violent shove, but enough to make my 72-year-old body lose its balance on the slick deck. I didn't have time to scream, only to turn for a split second. The last thing I saw was Amelia's horrified face, her eyes wide, her hand still outstretched. And behind her, Julian's face. He wasn't horrified. He was screaming, "Mother!" But his eyes were cold, calm, and calculating. The frigid air rushed into my lungs. The sky and the sea flipped upside down. A deafening splash as my body hit the water. The cold of the Atlantic felt like 1,000 needles piercing my skin. Salt water filled my mouth, my nose. Above, the image of the yacht, the Astor, grew smaller and smaller. I could still hear Julian's dramatic screams. His performance was flawless. Later, when the whole story came tumbling out, when I had the time and clarity to piece it all together, I could finally picture what happened in our Fifth Avenue penthouse in the days the world believed Vivian Astor was resting at the bottom of the sea. I imagine Amelia being brought home, shaking like a leaf in a storm, guilt and fear eating away at her. She wasn't a cold-blooded killer. She was a desperate daughter who had done a terrible thing. And Julian, the devoted husband, was right there to save her. He became her only anchor, her hero in the nightmare. I can see him holding her, cooing, "It's okay, my love. It was an accident. You are in shock. It wasn't your fault." And then he would bring out the small white pills. "Take this," I can hear his sweet voice. "It will help you calm down, help you sleep." It wasn't a sedative. It was something stronger, a kind of chemical leash that kept her in a docile, dreamlike state. It turned Amelia into a living doll in her own lavish penthouse, a gilded cage she never even knew she was in. While my daughter slept a poisoned sleep, Julian got to work. He replaced the entire loyal staff that had served me for decades, from the butler and the chauffeur to my personal lawyer. He told them, "Mrs. Astor has passed and Mrs. Hayes is in a fragile mental state and needs a completely new environment." He controlled every call, every email. Amelia's friends would call and he'd answer, "She's grieving terribly and needs her quiet. I'll pass along your message." Bit by bit, she was cut off from the entire world. I can just picture him sitting in Richard's study, a place he was never allowed to enter when I was there. Making calls, his voice no longer the gentle one he used with Amelia, but the cold, decisive tone of a new king. He met with lawyers, presenting power of attorney papers Amelia had signed in her stupor, beginning the emergency takeover of a massive fortune. The world pitied the poor daughter who had lost her mother, and the devoted husband shouldering it all. No one suspected a thing. His act was a stunning success. He had it all, the money, the power, and the freedom to decide the fate of the Astor Empire. He believed his play had reached its final act, a happy ending for him. But he was wrong. He underestimated one thing. He underestimated the will to survive of an Astor woman. He thought I was dead. And I was very much alive. And my own play was just beginning. The cold. That was the first thing I truly felt. A bone-deep cold. Not just from the seawater, but from the betrayal. As I sank into the dark water, the final image in my mind wasn't of my own death, but of Julian's cold eyes. In that moment, I knew Amelia was just a pawn. The one who truly wanted me dead was the man my daughter loved and trusted with all her heart. And that thought, as bitter as it was the very thing that tethered me to life. I couldn't die, not until I knew why. I don't know how long I was adrift. Time becomes meaningless when your body is screaming from exhaustion and hypothermia. My expensive designer dress was now a heavy shroud, pulling me down. But the will of a woman who had fought her whole life wouldn't let me give up. I kicked off my shoes, trying to stay afloat for as long as I could, clinging to a sliver of hope. And then, just as I was about to slip away, I heard it. The sputter of a small boat engine and a gruff voice cutting through the early morning fog. Good heavens, there's someone in the water! When I came to, the chill of the ocean was gone. In its place was the warmth of an old wool blanket and the faint scent of pine and chamomile tea. I was in a simple bed in a small, cozy wooden cabin. Morning light streamed through a window, illuminating walls covered in faded black and white photographs. An older woman, probably around my age, with silver hair in a bun and kind eyes that held a deep sadness, sat beside me, holding our mug. "You're awake," she said, her voice the same gruff one I'd heard earlier. "I'm Martha. I found you drifting near the shore when I was checking my nets." I'm Vivian," I whispered, my throat raw from the salt. I tried to sit up, but my whole body ached. Martha gently steadied me. "Just lie still now. You have a bad case of exposure. I've already called the doctor from town on the mainland. He'll be here soon." My eyes scanned the room again, and they stopped on the largest photograph on the wall, right above the fireplace. It was a portrait of a young man with a brilliant smile and an intelligent face, taken decades ago. Something about him was so familiar. "My husband," Martha said, her gaze distant as she looked at the picture. That was Walter. Walter. The name hit me like a bolt of lightning. Walter Kessler. Richard's first business partner, his one-time best friend. The man whose company file said he had embezzled company funds and then taken his own life in shame. I looked from Martha to the photograph. The room started to spin. "Walter Kessler?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Martha turned back to me, her kind eyes now filled with surprise and suspicion. "That's right. How did you know his last name?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My entire world was turning upside down. The woman who had saved my life was, by a cruel twist of fate, the widow of my husband's former partner. In the days that followed, as I healed, I heard Martha's story. It wasn't the version recorded in board meeting minutes or old newspaper clippings. This was a story told with tears, with sleepless nights, with the pain of a wife who had lost everything. She spoke of the deep friendship between Walter and Richard, how they built the company together from a small rented office. Walter was the creative genius, the one with the groundbreaking ideas. Richard was the public face, the one who could raise capital and charm anyone. They were an inseparable pair. But then, Martha's voice hitched, as the company grew, Richard changed. He wanted more. He wanted it all. He started cutting Walter out of big decisions, secretly changing contract terms. She showed me an old leather-bound journal. This was Walter's. He wrote it all down. My hands trembled as I turned the yellowed pages. Walter's handwriting was irrefutable proof. Meetings he wasn't invited to, secret accounts Richard opened, veiled threats, and finally, Richard's cruel plan to fabricate evidence, to pin a massive loss from his own bad decision on Walter, and to turn his best friend into an embezzler. "He didn't kill himself out of shame for what they said he did, Vivian," Martha said. tears tracing paths down her wrinkled cheeks. He killed himself out of despair. Richard took everything from him, his company, his honor, and his faith in friendship. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. The legacy I was so proud of, the castle I had spent my life defending, was built on a foundation of lies and on the life of another man. I told Martha my story, about the push, about Julian. When I mentioned the name Julian Hayes, I saw the color drain from Martha's face. "Hayes isn't his real name," she whispered, her voice filled with anguish. "After Walter died, my son and I had to leave New York, change our names to escape the humiliation, to start over. My son's birth name is Julian Kessler." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. A 20-year-long revenge plot, so intricate and so cruel. Julian didn't just want money. He wanted to destroy everything with the Astor name on it, just as Richard Astor had destroyed his family. And he had turned my own daughter into his weapon to do it. The shock gave way to a cold resolve. I looked at Martha. We were no longer strangers, the victor's wife and the loser's wife. We were two mothers. One who wanted to save what was left of her family and right the wrongs of the past, and one who wanted to save her son's soul from the poison of hatred. "We have to stop him," I said, my voice regaining its familiar steel. Martha nodded, a new determination in her eyes. "But how? He controls everything now." "He thinks he does," I replied. "But he's forgotten that the Astor Empire wasn't just built on money, but on relationships and loyalty. There are still people who owe a debt to Richard and to me." The first thing I did was contact my old private investigator, Marcus Thorne, the only man I knew I could trust. I told him everything, holding nothing back. He was stunned at first, but his loyalty won out. "What do you need me to do, Mrs. Astor?" "Follow Julian," I ordered. "I want to know his every move. And most importantly, gather all the evidence you can on his manipulation of Amelia and his plans. I want ironclad proof." Next, I had Marcus arrange a secret meeting with my lawyer, a brilliant, sharp woman. I needed to prepare for a legal counterattack. Meanwhile, Martha played a role just as crucial. She was the living witness, the embodiment of the truth. Walter's journal was our ultimate weapon. We sat together in that small wooden cabin, two silver-haired women, plotting how to face our common enemy. We didn't have much time. I knew from Marcus that Julian was moving fast. He was calling an emergency board meeting with the ultimate goal of dissolving the company. He wanted to burn it all to the ground. "He wants a coronation," I told Martha, "and we're going to give him his judgment day." The plan was set, a perfect trap, laid not just with laws and money, but with the love and pain of two mothers. I wasn't just going to take back what was mine. I was going to give back what should have always belonged to the Kesslers. It was the only way for the legacies of both our families to not be buried in hatred. The boardroom was on the top floor, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city. This had once been Richard's sanctuary, the place where the power of the Astor name was absolute. But today, a new king sat on the throne. Julian Hayes, or rather, Julian Kessler, stood at the head of the long wooden table, his back straight in a perfectly tailored suit. He radiated an arrogant kind of power. He was the master of all this. Beside him, Amelia sat like a beautiful wax figure. Her eyes were empty, lifeless, a result of the pills Julian had been feeding her. Seeing my daughter like that, a hot rage boiled up inside me, but I pushed it down. This was not the time for emotion. Marcus, my PI, had planted a discreet listening device in the room. Martha and I were in a nearby office, watching everything on a monitor, waiting for the perfect moment. Julian began his speech, his voice echoing through the room. He spoke of my sudden passing, of Amelia's inconsolable grief. He spoke of the need for change, to step out from the shadow of the past. And then he delivered the killing blow. Therefore, he announced, as the legal representative for the sole heir, Mrs. Amelia Astor Hayes, my first official act is to announce the immediate dissolution of the Richard Astor Legacy Institute project. Following that, we will begin the process of liquidating the core assets of Astor Financial. A stunned silence fell over the room. The board members looked at each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. Julian smiled, a victor's smile. He savored the chaos he had created, and for the final, personal blow, he decided to unmask himself. "You're probably asking why," he said, his tone turning sharp. "Let me tell you why. Because the Astor name was built on lies. Because the man you all worship, Richard Astor, was a thief and a traitor." He began to roar, 20 years of cultivated hatred finally exploding. "This fortune should have belonged to my father, Walter Kessler, the man who co-founded and built this empire. I'm sure you remember that name, don't you? The man who was shamed and humiliated for embezzlement. But do you know the truth? Richard Astor framed him. He used every dirty trick in the book to push my father out, to steal everything, his honor, his fortune, his family, and drive him to his death. All of you, you're profiting from my family's grave." He was screaming now, his face red with a euphoric rage. "I just want to watch this empire fall. I want to burn the Astor name to ash. That is justice." That was it. I signaled to Marcus. "It's time." The boardroom doors swung open. Every head turned. Julian froze mid-rant, his expression shifting from arrogant triumph to utter shock. I walked in, with Martha right behind me. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Amelia, as if jolted by an electric shock, blinked several times. The focus began to return to her vacant eyes. "Mom?" she whispered. Julian was the first to recover, but when he saw Martha behind me, his confidence shattered. "Mother?" His voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" Before he could say another word, Martha stepped forward. She looked only at her son. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was surprisingly firm. "Julian, stop this," she said, her voice ringing not with a mother's weakness, but as a guardian of a memory. "Your father, he wouldn't have wanted this. He was a builder. He loved what he created. You say you're doing this for him, but this revenge is destroying the very legacy of integrity I tried so hard to preserve for him." She moved closer. "Don't let this hate turn you into the very man you despise. Don't let it turn you into a second Richard Astor." Martha's words were like a dagger to Julian's heart. He staggered back, shaking his head. "No, you don't understand. I've come too far. It's too late." "It is never too late to choose the truth," I said, my voice ice cold. I signaled to my lawyer. On the large screen behind Julian, where his liquidation plan had just been displayed, a legal document now appeared. "You were right about one thing, Julian," I continued, looking him straight in the eye. "Richard, my husband, was wrong, and that is a debt that must be paid. I have spent this past week not in hiding, but in rectifying my husband's mistake." I pointed to the screen. "This is a legally executed agreement. I, Vivian Astor, am voluntarily transferring 50% of my personal assets and my controlling shares in Astor Financial to Mrs. Martha Kessler as a formal and long overdue restitution." I looked at him, emphasizing every word. "Your plan is over. You cannot destroy what now belongs to your own mother." Julian's entire world collapsed before his eyes. His face went pale, then red with helpless fury. His 2-decade-long revenge plot had just turned into a massive gift for the very mother in whose name he was seeking vengeance. The sheer, cruel irony of it broke him. "No, no!" he roared like a wounded animal. Just then, the doors opened again. This time it was FBI agents, tipped off by Marcus. Julian Kessler, a female agent, said, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and market manipulation." As the cold steel of the handcuffs snapped onto his wrists, Julian didn't resist. He just looked at me, then at his mother, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and defeat. He had lost not because I was smarter, but because he had underestimated the power of love and repentance. In the chaos, I looked over at Amelia. She was fully awake now. She had heard it all. The truth about the father she adored, the truth about the husband she loved, and the truth about her own actions. The weight of it was too much. She looked at me, her eyes filled with shame and agony. Then, without a word, she stood, stumbled out of the boardroom, walked through the crowd, and disappeared. The scandal rocked Wall Street, but Astor Financial didn't collapse. It was reborn. The new board of directors had two co-chairs, Vivian Astor and Martha Kessler. Together, we made the entire truth public. I kept my promise. The Legacy Institute was founded with a new mission to provide legal support for small entrepreneurs and bright young kids with startup dreams. It was a new legacy, rebuilt from the ashes of two families. Months went by. I heard nothing from Amelia, until one day a letter arrived, postmarked from a small town in Oregon with no return address. "Mom," it read, "I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I don't think I can ever forgive myself, but I'm learning to live with the truth. I'm learning to be someone else, someone who isn't Richard Astor's daughter or Julian Kessler's wife. Maybe one day I'll be brave enough to face you, but not yet. Goodbye, Mom." I folded the letter and placed it on my desk. Next to it was a postcard I'd received the week before, a picture of a lighthouse with just 3 words. "Thank you, Martha." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling city below. I had paid the price for the legacy. I had delivered justice, but that price was loneliness. I had saved my empire, but I had lost my family. And that's a life sentence I will carry with me until the very end.